If you've been to the museum since 2016, you might be familiar with the wall hanging behind me. It's a textile that was designed for the Festival of Britain displays on South Bank in London in 1951. And it was designed by an artist called Michael O'Connell and completed by a team of studio assistants, Iris and Betty Sheridan, who worked with him, to produce these extraordinary wax-resist tied textiles, which then formed a 46-metre long display in the country pavilion of the South Bank Festival site. Until recently, we'd imagined that these wall hangings hadn't really been on public display very much until the 1990s, when a former colleague of ours, the late Jill Betts, conducted some research into their history, the ways in which O'Connell and his team had made them, and the displays at the Festival of Britain site. What Jill Betts discovered was that they'd been placed on display, and then when the displays came down in September 1951, they were packed up, as were many other bits of the Festival of Britain displays, and dispersed to other sites around the country. Jill had them photographed in the university squash courts in the 1990s as part of her research process. When we came to redisplay the museum in 2016, it was an exciting opportunity to do loads of things with collections that hadn't been seen very much. And as a result, we had two of these wall hangings, Kent and Cheshire, conserved. The one behind me is Kent. We had a competition at the time to decide chalk or cheese, chalk being the chalky landscapes of Kent and cheese being the cheesy implications of a Cheshire landscape. The other ones in the series depict other topographies and landscapes from around the country. So the idea was to create, in 1951, this sense of what kind of traditional agricultural practices were happening in the landscape and had happened over the millennia leading up to that point. Kent, as you can see, has oast houses and fields and hop farm activity going on, lots of exciting stuff that indicates that this is that particular county. And likewise, Cheshire has things that indicate what happens in Cheshire. We've long had the plan that we would swap these over at some point. So chalk giving way to cheese. Now is that moment. So the first wall hanging, Kent, has been on display for 5 years. And as we know, textiles are light sensitive, and on top of that, the textiles hang on their own weight, and that can be damaging if left for a long period of time. But it's also exciting to have a chance to share with you another of these exciting and vibrant pieces of art. So it's great that when we welcome people back into the museum after a long period of closure, they'll be coming back not to see Kent, which will have gone back into storage, but to see Cheshire, chalk giving way to cheese. We've also discovered, since Jill Betts did her initial research in the 1990s, that these wall hangings were on public display in various other guises in the intervening period. As soon as 1952, at the Royal Show in Newton Abbot in rural Devon, the museum itself used all of these wall hangings as the backdrop to its own mobile museum displays. So they hung rather unceremoniously, admittedly at the back of a fairly ramshackle trade stand in which there was a well-designed museum display. We wouldn't hang them out in a Royal Show environment now, and you wouldn't see us hanging them out at the Berkshire Show. But we do want to share them wherever possible. So in preparation for our 51 Voices project, we were looking back through the documentation that charts the history of these collections, both before and during the time that they've been part of the museum's holdings. And we were excited to learn that at least one of them travelled elsewhere in England in 1955. 1955 is a significant year for the museum because it's the date the museum opened the very first time to the visiting public. It had been on those peripatetic mobile museum trips to various agricultural shows up and down the country, as we know, but in 1955 they opened fixed, permanent displays at the university's White Knights campus. These wall hangings weren't placed on display. they were too large, and probably it was a very short time after they'd been seen by many millions at the Festival of Britain. But in 1955, York Castle Museum wrote to the museum and requested the loan of one of the wall hangings for display in a temporary exhibition at that museum. So we know that one of the wall hangings, and we're guessing it was probably Yorkshire, went up to Yorkshire, up to York Castle, and was placed on display. So if you happen to know anything about that display, we'd love to hear from you, because we've never seen photos or heard stories about that moment before. And the story we'll share with you later in the year about the wall hanging's greater travels involves them heading to the global south, where we think they played a minor walk-on part in a very significant moment in global history.